To start off with, please could you introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about who you are and what you do, and maybe some of your experience or background in this area. So Dave.
So my name's Dave Stout. Hello. Hi. I guess the reason why I'm sat here is I work for the Church of England. I'm part of what's called the National Giving Team. So my team is based down in Westminster, and our team is to help grow generosity and giving across the whole of the Church of England. And so I've been in that role since the middle of 2020. Prior to that, I was the giving advisor for Sheffield Diocese. So I worked across churches in South Yorkshire, supporting and trying to grow giving and generosity in those spaces.
Great, thank you, Steve.
I'm Steve Pendlebury. I'm a retired vicar, and I think I'm here because I'm a last-minute replacement for the...
I told you not to stay that, Steve.
the guy from the diocese who couldn't make it. So Alistair's flattered me by saying it's your previous experience of having been an accountant and a church treasurer, and also involved in running some local Christian charities as well. Great. So I think that's why I'm here.
Very blessed to have you here, Steve. Use that one, yeah.
Okay, so I'm Lynn. This is Cassia. So I'm here, I think, because Andrew, my husband, right there, and I both work for a Christian missions organisation. It's called Agape UK. It's global in over 190 countries. And we've been doing this for about 9 years at this point. So essentially what we are is missionaries, which that word can have different connotations and different understandings to lots of different people. But it means that our full-time job is serving God and using our gifts for that. And we get to spend our working day working for God. Over the years, that's taken us through lots of different kind of ministries, but that's
Great.
it.
So can I come back to you, Lynn, first? Because you've experienced some other cultures, not just British culture. But do you think, just as a way of getting into this discussion, that Brits struggle to talk about money? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yes, good point. I have lived in other countries and cultures, so I do want to caveat this with I am not an expert in British culture. I hold the passport, but so my personal observation is that yes, even the fact that I was nervous about this question, I think proves the point that British people are awkward about talking about money. But yes, I think, yes, we do struggle to talk about money, and I think it's because money is personal. How we use it, how we don't use it. I say use it because money is a tool. How much we have, how little we have, I think it's very exposing. And so typically, I think it can be hard for British people to be vulnerable and share all aspects of their life like that. And so I think that is why it is hard for British people, or generally speaking, some British people to talk about money because it is such a personal thing.
Yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I agree, firstly. But what I will also say is it kind of depends on the context, and specifically, whose money. We love talking about other people's money, right? Like, particularly in sport, right? If there's a new, like, if your football team has bought a new footballer, right? The main discourse is not their quality or ability, but how much they earn, right? And we do like sort of talking about money in that sense. Like this week, we've been talking about money quite a lot because of the budget, right? Anybody read an article about the budget this week or talked about the budget this week? Anybody? Quite, yeah, okay. So, there was a bit of a discourse there about kind of country finances in that sense. I think also, anyone know the Money Saving Expert, the website Money Saving Expert? Okay. They have 26 million hits a week. Which account for 16 million individual UK users, right? 16 million the UK population go on a money website, right? That's part of our money discourse in this country, right? 9 million active readers of their email every week, right? So there is this discourse around money. We do have that conversation, and it's it's also like, in our kind of Western capitalist culture, money is like one of the big drivers in society, right? And whether we like it or not, what we do, like the cars we drive, the houses we own, the clothes we wear, the technology we have, that's all telling a story about our finances and our money, right? So to kind of slightly kind of twist that quote, which is often attributed to St. Francis, right? Preach the gospel at all times and if necessary use words, right? Our sermon in the West is money, right? That's what we talk about, just silently through how we act. But we really don't like talking about our own money, even though that we portray this language of money a lot of the time. And I think even more than that, we really don't like talking about what we give. Like that to me, my experience, that's like one of the biggest taboo. To talk about your own generosity feels inherently ungenerous. It's like, oh, you can't brag about it, can you? You can't like say, oh yeah, this is how much I give. Did you hear how great I was the other day? I gave this. But it's yeah. There you go. Sorry, I waffled.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. Steve, and your experience of working in churches and particularly in charities as well, and having to talk to people about money, because you need money to make things run in one sense.
I think I agree with all you've said, actually, but and especially we don't like being asked how we spend our money, or somebody putting things on us, like maybe you should be more generous, or maybe you shouldn't waste so much money buying so many of these things which are not good. We think that's my business. Don't you keep out of it, and therefore it is quite awkward sometimes to ask for money and try it. I think I always used to work on trying to actually, as Christians, we're actually supposed to be generous, because we have a generous God who's given us so much, and we are supposed to be trying to be like him, and therefore we should be actually, yeah. I mean, I think they often say that the last part of a person's to be converted is their wallet, and the idea of that God might have some thoughts on what we actually do with our money, on all of our money, not just on how much we give, but on how much we spend it. And that's quite a scary thought, especially if somebody challenges you on it.
Yes, yeah. Lynn, I'm right in thinking that you essentially rely on the generosity of people to be able to live and to work. Can you say a bit about how that feels in terms of asking people and talking about money with people?
Yes, we do. Andrew and I we are entirely funded by what we call our ministry partner team, which is a group of individuals who give monthly or one time or commit to praying for us. And yeah, like you said, we are the missionaries who rely on the generosity of people. And we actively invite people onto that team, which essentially is asking people for money. We are asking people for money, yes, but we're also inviting them into a partnership of what we really believe is significant collaboration for this shared goal of people knowing and experiencing God. But in light of that, it's, this is both it's an easy and a hard question, is how do we find that? Because, we've had so many positive experiences with this. We have had people brought into our lives purely through this connection that I'm so grateful for, that we would not know otherwise. We have deepened so many relationships with people through this significant connection, but there have also been negative experiences, either in how people are receiving that ask or in our own discomfort with the vulnerability of our need. So it has been challenging. It continues to be challenging. And it is countercultural. I've heard it referred to before as kingdom culture when you give to churches or to missionaries, but it is very countercultural. And I think it's kind of interesting because there is a culture whether it's Christian initiatives or not, for short-term giving and project giving. But that's not the world that Andrew and I live in. We are full-time missionaries, and like I said, have been doing this for close to a decade. And so it's wonderful and impactful to give to projects, but we live in a world where we are often having to explain why we do what we do and the value behind what we do. But overall, I think God has just been so wonderful in the people that he's brought into our life. And yes, there have been very difficult times of that, and awkward times of that, because as we said, British people can be difficult in conversations about money, but vastly outweighed by the joy that it is to be in ministry and in mission with people.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask if it's changed, because you're receiving your income essentially from people's giving, it's changed your perception on your money and how you use your money? Is that?
That's a good question. Yes, I think it is just very clear to me that it is all God's money. Whether you're salaried by a large company and you never meet the person who signs your checks, or whether, we have a group of 50 people, or I'm pulling that number out of nowhere, but whether we have direct people who contribute to what we get at the end of the month to live our life, it's all God's. However we get it, we're all reliant on God. And so I think that is just true for everyone. So in some ways it does feel different, and in some ways it feels exactly the same as everyone else that we're peers with.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
Just to follow up on what Lynn was saying, the charity that we were involved with has been going for 30 years in Chester. And when it started, there was tremendous enthusiasm and giving. But then over time, new projects come into the city and new things, and people say, will you fund a new short-term thing? And if you're not careful, then the desire to continue funding what is still doing incredibly good work drops. And could I put a plea that sometimes we don't forget some of the stuff that is still ongoing and still needs supporting? But,
yeah. Steve, you touched a bit on the understanding of generosity that we see within the Bible and God's heart and love for that. But if we were trying to form a kind of biblical or a theology of generosity, what would you guys say to that, and where would you point us if we were trying to develop that understanding?
Let the church in England use them first, and I'll have a proper view afterwards.
Yes.
Thanks for that. Fundamentally, we are called to give, and we are called to be generous. And that's something that you can see, you can read in the Bible, you can see through history. I believe we feel a calling of that from the Holy Spirit as well in our lives. I also believe that, as we are, as humans created by God, we are part of a design of humanity that is built to be generous. That's kind of part of the core purpose of humanity. That's how we were created. And so in being generous, and I'm using a kind of catch-all term of generous there rather than giving, because often when we talk about giving, we often think about money. And rightly so. When I talk about generosity, I'm talking about whole life generosity, so I'm talking about money, the way that we're interacting with individuals, the way we think about individuals, the way we think about the world, all those sorts of things. The time we take, all that sort of stuff. God is a generous God. We know that. We see that throughout the Bible. We see that throughout history. God is a generous God. You can't deny that. And as we are designed and created in God's image, we find more of who we are when we become more generous. As we grow in our generosity, we find a greater holiness and wholeness in ourselves. And that kind of is a bit of a snowball thing. So when you become more generous, as you try to be more generous, that sense of becoming more Christ-like, more God-like, more who you were designed to be, grows and creates more generosity. So for me, any kind of concept of generosity or giving starts with that concept that God is a generous God and builds from there. What do you want to correct?
Nothing on that one. My mind's gone blank. Can I just talk a bit about my experience? Because if we're talking about giving in terms of money, although that's not all it is in terms of, I think I was fortunate that when I became a Christian, I was in circles where, and I devoured lots of Christian literature when I first became a Christian. And there were lots of stories about God's faithfulness to people who were generous with money and with time, energy, and lots of things. And that sort of inspired me quite early on. And I mean, I was in those circles where, to give a tenth was the norm, because I wasn't in the Anglican church when I first became a Christian. To give a tenth was the norm, and you gave free will offerings on top of that. And there were big debates about should it be gross or net or whatever, and how much do you want to be blessed? Go for the gross and things like that. And I think I was actually inspired to start putting stuff into practice at an early age in my Christian life, and I actually found that God has never let us down. That somehow He's provided for us and blessed us. Often not necessarily with money, but in other ways as well. And God only blesses us because He wants us to actually bless others and to share that blessing with others and not keep it to ourselves. And can I tell the story of Rick Warren?
Please.
Rick Warren is the pastor of Saddleback Community Church in the States, a big mega church. And he wrote a book some years ago called The Purpose-Driven Life. I don't know whether anybody's read it.
Sorry.
But it became a bestseller. And actually,
Keep going. Yeah.
I'm on a different mic now. So, 1, 2. 1, 2.
Which one, Dave?
1, 2.
Try that one again.
1, 2. All right. Okay. And he wrote this book, which became $1 million seller book. He was on the cover of Time magazine and the rest of it. And actually, they came and interviewed him. Lots of people came and said, well, now that you've made all this money, how's it changed you? And he said, well, it's not. And he said, why not? And he said, well, I still live in the same house. I still drive the same car. And I've set up this trust. So all the profits go into this trust, which was funding work in Africa. And he said, I did take some out to actually pay back to the church all my salary over the past 10 years or whatever it was. And he was giving a talk somewhere, and somebody came up to him afterwards and said, why did God give that book to you to write and not to me? And he says, well, maybe he realized how I'd use the money and what I'd do with the money, that maybe he could trust me. And he says, well, I'd do that too. If I'd written the book, I'd give it away just like that. And Rick Warren said to him, no, you wouldn't, because you're not doing it now. And Rick Warren actually had a track record of generosity. And I think him and his wife very early on made a pledge that they would increase their giving every year, even if it was only by a small percent. Like, And the bad time, 0.1 or 0.01%, but they would increase it year on year. So he had the record of doing it. And it's actually, there's a bishop, I think Graham Tomlin, used to run a course on generosity. And he used to tell people to come. It's a very practical course. Come with lots of money. We're going to give it away. Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, that's great.
On the same lines as that, one thing that I always come back to in all of my teaching and research about what giving is and what giving isn't is that we give as a response to God's generosity to us. It is a natural outpouring of everything we have been given. We don't give anything that he has not already given us. And there's a verse in, I wrote it down because I knew I would forget, in 1 Corinthians, where King David, or King Dave, as in that that song, King David is building the temple and obviously needs resources for that. And in verse 14 he says, "But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given only what comes from your hand." And it kind of reminds me of when you're a kid and you buy your parent a present, if it's their birthday or Mother's Day, Father's Day, and I just remember loving that feeling of giving my mum a present. But my only source of income at that point in time was pocket money from my mum. And I do kind of think at a larger scale, that is what we give now. We give as a response to what God has given us. And I think it's a really wonderful feeling, that feeling of giving back.
Yeah. So many charities, missionaries, churches rely on the generosity of others. So is it appropriate to ask people for money? Should we do it? And if so, how should we do it?
Yes. Yes, we should. We should do it well, and we should do it more. One of the challenges that I would give churches when I was working directly with churches, and they would say things like, we did a Giving Sunday a couple of years ago, or that kind of thing. You know, they don't have like giving information out or that kind of thing. I would always challenge them and say, if you don't give people the opportunity to give, you're restricting their ability to be godlike. When we hold people back from being generous, we are stopping them from being generous. It's that simple. And if we believe that generosity is a godlike quality, something that we should strive to be, then we should be doing everything we can to help people be generous. In that sense, giving can be a missional act, encouraging people in our society to give and give generously to charities, to kingdom work, to our churches, is a way of saying to them and to ourselves that there is something greater happening here in the world. There is something bigger. There is something more that we can connect to that is beyond ourselves and beyond our family units. There is a concept of community that we can live in together. Churches, for better or good, are trying to be that concept of community, that faithful group of people who live together and share life together to become more Christ-like. We get it right, we get it wrong, all those sorts of things, but that's the pursuit. That's what we're trying to achieve. And so for us inside the church, there is a calling on us to maintain this, a very practical calling of we need money to keep the lights on, right? So giving can be practical. Giving can be community-focused. There needs to be money within this setup so that we can reach out to others in community. And giving is a very spiritual act. That relationship between ourselves and God. So it's really important that we encourage giving. Now, what I'm about to say, two things. One, this might sound like criticism of the leadership of this church. It's not. And 2, it's bad biblical studies. So apologies, everyone, but I'm going to say it anyway. In the Bible, I mean, it's a risky thing to say for a church, right? In the Bible, it talks about giving in a monetary sense about 4 times as often as it does about praying, right? Now, we're in the middle of a series about praying. When was the last time we did a series about giving? It's not a criticism, right? It's good to have a series about praying. But giving isn't simply just saying, hey guys, who gives money to church? Put your hands up. Don't put your hands up. If you're not, you should give. And this is how. It is a bit of that, right? Obviously. You need to know practically how to give, and why it's good to give. But giving and generosity is a far broader concept about how we are as individuals, how we are as people within this community, and how we are looking outside of these doors into the community around us. And so it's really important that we look. There was a great example of a vicar in a church who said their giving wasn't high enough. So for 1 year, they weren't going to talk about monetary giving at all. But what they were going to do is they were going to take the lectionary readings, so the set readings for the whole year, and they were just going to focus on the generosity in those passages. Right? Because you can see generosity in every passage in the Bible. So they spent the whole year just talking about generosity in their church. They didn't talk about giving money, or they didn't ask for any money. They just made sure that people knew how to give. And their giving went crazy. Just because they talked about God-like generosity. We need to talk more about our giving and break that taboo of personal finances. But what we also, and I think this is really critical, what we also need to do individually to one another, from the front to the congregations, we need to thank each other for giving. Thank you for being generous to this community. Thank you for giving to this church. It means we can be here. It also means that other people in South Yorkshire can also have churches where they can meet and join and have ministry provided. And people in our community can receive blessing from this church. It would be incredible if this church could become a church that is known for thanking one another for their generosity, for each other's generosity. That's valuing that gift. That's valuing that godlike quality in each of us. And as we are thankful for each other, it is a subtle reminder that we should be generous and more generous. But it also is honouring of each other's circumstances, whether that's giving a lot or a little, whatever it is. Time, money, presence, thought, prayer. It's really valuable that we talk about generosity, but then we back that up with thankfulness.
Brilliant, thank you. Steve, Lynn, do you want to say anything more?
I was reading a survey by Stewardship that was done in 2022, so pretty recent, and I think it really blew my mind, some of the statistics, and they surveyed a large group of young Christians in the UK, and one of the questions that they asked is, what is an obstacle to you giving? And I had assumed it would be things like cost of living, just general difficulty in the expense of their life. But actually 35%, which was the vast majority, was that they didn't know what to give to, which I was kind of shocked by. And it wasn't actually that they didn't have the desire or the drive to give, they just didn't know what to give to. And I think that's because it's not always mapped out what the options are. So that was just a very recent revelation to me of like, oh yeah, people are generous, people want to be generous. And it goes back to what Dave said about they don't necessarily have opportunities to be that way.
Great. Yeah.
When I retired the first time, we went to a student church and increased the age of the congregation no end. But they had a giving station at the back of church, where there was just a place where it just let you know all the ways you could contribute to the work of this church and what that money went towards funding and doing and stuff like that. And I think they drew attention to it, not as a big thing, but at least once a month they would draw, if you wish to support the work of this church, then go and see the station and find out how to do it.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important for churches to model generosity if they want to encourage generosity in the congregation. And that's in a sense why we as a church give away 10% of our income to mission bodies and activities. And we need to do that and proclaim it that we think it's right for us to do that as a church body. Yeah.
Talking of demonstrating it, one of the things that we in my team encourage churches to explore conceptually is the idea of a boomerang offering. So we all know what an offering is. The kind of plate gets passed around. We don't do it like that in this church, but the plate gets passed around and people put money and it goes and goes to the work of the church. Boomerangs. You throw a boomerang and it comes back, right? A boomerang offering is where everybody who turns up to church gets given £10, £20 from the church. And the challenge is for every individual to go and use that money generously and to come back with a story. And the next week, or in a couple of weeks' time, you write down the stories and then you tell the stories of that generosity, of how that money has gone and impacted the world around us. So that might be something the PCC and the leadership of the church might want to do. But it's great because it gives you this bank of generous stories that you can then rely on to go, this is what happens when you're generous. This is the impact that happens when you're generous. If you're in a queue in a supermarket and someone pays for somebody else's food or whatever it is, their bill, it's the talk of the supermarket. And then it's the talk of you when you go home. This happened. Or you say it at work or whatever. Generosity, generous acts are contagious. We like telling the stories of generous acts because we see them to be good and true and fundamentally holy acts within a world that doesn't necessarily focus on those sorts of acts. I think this is why it's really good to talk about those acts of generosity. It's not bragging to say, I did this thing and it was generous. We should not be embarrassed to talk about a time where we have blessed others. It is just sharing that wider story of God's kingdom in the world.
Great. So to close, it's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much to share. What about some practical tips? I mean, Steve, you mentioned 10%. Some people use that as a helpful guide. But yeah, what about some practical tips if people are thinking, okay, I'd love to be more generous, I don't know how, I don't know what to give, net giving, what that kind of thing. What would you suggest?
I did mention 10%, but actually the New Testament doesn't mention any sort of percentage. It just talks actually about generosity being quite extravagant. And Paul, when he's asking a collection of the Corinthians, is praising the Macedonians who out of their lack they gave so much and did so much, and how it's rebounded with thanksgiving and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We did try the boomerang effect once, but it was a long time ago, so I think it was only £5 we gave to everyone, not £10. But I got some interesting comments because even the visitors got the money. Everyone there got the money. And you meet people and say, that's the man who gave me £5 in church.
Yeah.
Well, so it makes a mark.
Yeah. So practically
where we missed out was we didn't follow up on the stories quite so much. So that is actually valid. Yeah.
So practically, can you just share, if you're willing, about how you give, what you give, just to give an example, and if you're Might be seeing as we're talking about it.
Okay, well, I'm an ex-accountant, so I have a budget. So I sort of allocate so much giving a year. I think my biggest single contribution goes to the church, and then the rest, most of the rest goes on organizations or people I've supported regularly for many years now. And then we have a bit left over at the end for whatever might come up during the year and things like that. That's how I do it. But I'm an accountant. I work with budgets and things like that.
What about you, Lynn?
I am not an accountant. I'm kind of terrible with numbers. So we do have a budget to help to work against that. And for us, we obviously, being on the receiving side of things, wanted to be very intentional about what we gave and who or what we gave to. So we were very strategic about how we would break that up. And so we are just so connected and so motivated by a couple of people that we see personally in ministry. So we give to 3 missionaries in our organization, but also in different organizations. Just we really felt called to give to them. And then, so that's a certain percentage. We also really care about the environment. And so that was another thing that we valued enough to want to give a certain percentage to as well. And then we wanted to leave a certain amount free. Andrew is American, and there are always natural disasters happening in America, and they always in some way touch someone close to a state that we're connected to, someone or some state that we're connected to. So we also kind of always have money aside for that. So as and when there's a hurricane in Florida, we're giving it to General Florida. So that's how we decided to break our giving up.
Great, thank you.
We're similar. About half our giving comes to church. A chunk of the rest goes to a variety of different charities that we support, and then we keep a bit as a kind of emergency response to kind of friends or people we kind of come up with, meet and that sort of thing, to just sort of have a kind of more responsive generosity kind of thing. So the way that we give to the church is through something called Parish Giving Scheme, which is a really simple process that you can set up online. If you go to the St. Gabriel's website and go to Get Involved and then Give, you'll see a banner there that says Give Through Parish Giving Scheme. You just click on there, set up an account, set up a monthly direct debit. You can choose to have your gift grow with inflation so that the gift amount kind of matches in terms of what it's costing. It's really simple to set up, really nice and easy. So I'd encourage you, if you want to give monthly to the church, or quarterly or annually, that is a really effective way to do that. You can anonymize your gift as well if you really want your gift to be anonymized. But that's entirely up to you. But it's a really simple way to give. So if you want to set up a giving to the church, then do that. It's really simple. And the gift aid is claimed back automatically through that to the church as well. So if you want your gift to be gift aided, then that's all processed on behalf of the church as well for you. So it's a really simple process. My encouragement to everyone would be to look at your own finances and think about what feels like a good amount to give. Giving, from my perspective, should be generous. Like, it should be a little bit stretching of you. It shouldn't be a burden on you. Generosity that becomes a burden starts to feel not a lot like generosity anymore. It should be the right amount for you and your setting. I'm not going to give you figures of what you should give. It's something to ask of yourself. If you're looking for a metric of how much you should give, the trouble that we have is the most generous act is this: Jesus on the cross, right? So you're not going to match that, so don't try, right? But what you can do is you can be generous in your context. Think about what's right to give to the church. Think about that kind of practical side, that community side, that spiritual side of giving as well, I would say. And think about what causes that you're passionate about. Give to what you're passionate about and you believe in as well, because there are numerous charities around the world who are crying out for your donations, both one-off and monthly. There's fantastic charities here in the city, in the UK and around the world. And it can be fantastic to give and to give generously in those contexts, to hear those stories of generosity back. We give on behalf of our daughters to UNICEF, and they send each month a pack that's sent from Paddington. And Paddington goes on his travels around the world, and he talks about these countries. And so our girls are learning all about these countries, and they're learning some of the language from these countries and the issues and the struggles and all those sorts of things. And Paddington is telling that story. It's absolutely fantastic. There are great ways of involving the whole family in that conversation about giving as well. So I'd encourage you to have that sort of conversation as well. But if you want to give to church, go on the church website, get involved, give, and sign up to the parish giving scheme. You can do it by paper form as well if you need to.
Great. Thank you guys so much for all that you've shared. And I just want to encourage everyone else to take the opportunity to speak to them. Maybe after the service for tea, coffee, they'll be around. But if you don't catch them then, they'll be around at other times as well. But I hope this morning has been an encouragement to you and has been an invitation to you that you don't come away feeling any sense of guilt or burden, as Dave was mentioning, but feel that actually giving is something that is life-giving. Giving is something that is at the heart of God's generosity and the heart of what it means to be made in his image. So thank you so much, guys, for sharing. Let's give them a big round of applause, and we're going to continue with the rest of our service.